Hey guys, last week, how exciting, week 6 in our crash course in Ableton Live. We're going to be going over some more advanced mixing techniques, kind of taking off from where we left it last week, and just finalizing our songs. And I'm going to show you a few little things just to kind of bring all the elements together in the arrangement view. So I have gone ahead and kind of restructured, added a few elements to my song. And there's a few weird things going on that you might not be familiar with, like this crash cymbal audio file. I added some arpeggiated stuff in here. And I'll go through and explain what I've done, and I'll show you some other things, including automation as well. Automation is where we can kind of make the parameters of each sound. We can basically automate anything as it goes left to right, so we can draw in what we want it to do. That will make more sense to you shortly. So the first thing I'm going to quickly show you is back in the session view is just a very simple technique just called grouping. And literally what we do is we highlight a song. We highlight a channel. You hit shift and you highlight as many channels as you like. And these are to make groups. So I'm going to right click and hit group tracks, which as you can see groups the drums into one track. And if you hit Command R or Control R, you can rename that. So I'm going to rename that drums. Now what that's going to do is that's going to group any of the elements within the drum. So I've added that crash cymbal there, and I've grouped it with the rest of the drums to kind of merge them together so they're one thing. And what you can do is you can manipulate all those channels by simply adding stuff and effects to the master group. So this one here. So for the sake of that, I'm just going to quickly add what's called a glue compressor, which I kind of went over last week. That's just going to gel that crash cymbal with the rest of the drums really nicely. That's in glue compressor. You can use presets or you can make your own settings. If I'm in a rush or for the sake of just kind of a song that I'm listening for my own pleasure, I will usually use one of these drum things here. Full parallel is quite nice. So I'm just going to solo that. That's going to bring those drums together quite nicely. And you can see it's doing its job down the bottom by the VU meter, kind of moving up and down. That's a good amount of compression, just under 10 dB, nice. Awesome, so that's a little simple technique that you guys can use. Use it for any elements that need to be grouped together, typically drums. Maybe if you have a few, say, lead lines or pads that you want to gel together, you can use the glue compressor and group in those circumstances. So I'm just going to quickly go through each element and what I've done quickly, just going over last week. So this chords, I ended up doing some compression and a bit of EQ. Now, there's a really cool technique that's quite important, and it's called sidechain compression. Now, what sidechain compression does is you can select the compressor to kind of duck its sound from any element. This is really important and really good for mixing kick drums and bass together, or to get that really big swelling pad sound. You can hear it here if I solo my chords. Wrong chords in my pads. You can hear it swelling. You can make it more. Awesome. So that's sidechain compression, and I'm going to quickly show you how to do it. So I'm going to delete that for now, and we'll just drag a new compressor in. So I'm doing this on the chords, but it is really useful on the bass, and I'll show you that shortly after. So what we do is we extend the compressor like that so we can see it all. And there's this button called sidechain here. And we select that button, which means sidechain is on. Now we need to tell the compressor where to kind of duck the audio from. So I'm going to sidechain this chord to the kick drum. And that is in my drum group. Now there's a few things that show up when you say audio from, and that is all the channels that you have left to right. So you can see I've got drums, crash. Now I want to duck it from the kick drum, so I'm going to select the second drums. That's because the kick drum is in this group here. If I go back to the compressor, and then I want to choose the kick drum. The easiest way of doing that is quite literally, let's play the element. can see the VU meters here, so the kick drum is there. So I've selected the kick drum. Now it says pre-effects or post-effects. You can select pre or post, depending on which you'd rather. It's usually a good idea to select pre, I would say, because it's before all the effects. It will give it the cleanest kick sample available. So I'm gonna kick solid metal pre-effects, like so. And as we drag this compressor down, you will see that the kick drum is ducking that audio nicely. So I'm just going to play around with the settings until it's desirable. That sounds pretty good. Now one last other thing to note with the attack and release settings here. I've got a really high ratio, but I'm going to set the attack to be quite short, which means the compressor is going to open up really quickly. The attack is very quick. And that's pretty good. With the release, you want that orange line to come back to 0 by the kind of start of the next kick drum. So that's pretty nice. It's got a nice swell. And you can immediately hear the results. Those pads are getting ducked as soon as the kick drums hit. So that's a really valuable technique for mixing and making your mix sound a lot cleaner. Now I'm just going to jump over to the bass here. So you can see I've already selected that I want it to sidechain from the drums and I want it to sidechain from that kick. Now if I command and solo those two elements together, you can hear that as the kick drum sounds, the audio signal of the bass ducks. Now why that's really important is because typically the kick drum and the bass are fighting for space in the mix. They have a lot of the same frequencies, so one way to counteract that is to kind of make sure that they're not hitting at the exact same time. That's why we use sidechain compression. So sidechain compression is really valuable for lots of different reasons. Have a go with putting it on your bass, and then for some more textural things, maybe on chords like I did here. Awesome. Great, so I'm going to jump back into my arrangement view. We've now grouped those drums at the top and added some sidechain compression to kind of clean the mix up a little bit. And I'm just going to play it from the start and kind of talk you through the structure as we go along. So I added a vocal in our Zoom meeting last week here. And I've added some ping pong delay, which is in the effects settings on the side. And because that delay is unique to that vocal sample, I've dragged it onto the channel as opposed to using the sends and returns that we did talk about last week. And then I've just copy and pasted the crash symbol, which I grouped with the drums. And I did that from going into here and then selecting the crash that I wanted in here, and then literally just dragging that onto the session like so. And then I added a tiny bit of delay using the sends here. So another couple things to mention while I just pause it there is panning. Now we have talked briefly about panning. Panning is invaluable to making a very clean mix. Panning pans the audio to whichever speaker you would like it to. So left, right, or in the middle, or any variation of those. So I'm going to choose some elements that aren't too drastic. So that vocal is a good place to start. I'm going to pan out to the right hand side, say. And the main thing with mixing is you want even balance. So if you are panning one element a long way to the right, it's probably a good idea to choose another appropriate element and pan it to the other side. Also really valuable on drums. A little more difficult on drums doing the panning because you have to go in and you have to individually pan each drum. But it's really good for spreading the mix out a little bit. So I have, like I said, I've panned my vocal sample like so to the right a little bit. I've got an ARP line that's later in the song. I'm going to pan that to the other side left. So when they're both playing, it spreads it out. Strings, maybe give them a bit of space to the right. Bass, you should always have down the middle. And another good trick for bass as well is in the utilities function in the audio effects. So if we go down to utility and we drag bass mono onto our bass. Now what that's going to do is that's going to make the bass signal a mono signal, which means it's going to send the exact same signal to the left and right speaker. It's particularly important when your music is being played in a larger club through bigger sound systems with subwoofers. You'll really notice the difference once you mono the bass. Probably a little subtle if you're listening on laptop speakers or headphones. You won't be able to hear much. Cool. So that's our bass chain there. We've got a bit of sidechain compression just to duck it with the kick drum. I've taken a lot of the high frequencies out because we don't need them with the bass, and then I've just monoed it. Then I'll just jump to the bridge, show you what's happening there. Cool, so I've got this little lead line here at the end. Now I panned it, you can hear it coming out the right speaker. Those strings I've got coming out of the left to counteract what I did with the right. Cool, so that's all sounding pretty good, nice and balanced. I wouldn't go too far with the panning, too far left or right. I mean, it's a technique that a lot of bands may use and stuff. You've got to also kind of imagine your music being played in the environment that it's going to be listened in. A lot of hard panning may not be as valuable on, say, a big sound system outside, because obviously not everyone is going to be standing perfectly in the middle. So it's a good idea to kind of spread that out a little bit across both sides. Now, I just want to touch on automation. Automation is a really, really good tool for kind of crafting the sound over time. Now, what we do with automation, you've got to go into View and go into Automation mode, which brings up these variables here on each channel. Another way, I believe you can hit A, depending on what version or you're using, but you can hit A, I believe, and automation mode will come up. So for now, I'm just going to deselect any of the automation so that we're just starting from a blank canvas. Now what you can do is you can choose any element from the instrument. So I'm going to solo these pads here for a moment. So you can hear as I turn that filter cutoff or any knob, the sound is going to change. Now we want that sound to change over time. I find that if you don't automate things, or if you've just got one sound that doesn't move at all, it can get boring over time. So we want to try and make the sound breathe a little bit, and automation can be really valuable for this. So to manually input automation, we go into the element we want to automate, and we find it in here. So the top one is what we want to automate. So we want to automate the Juno pad, and we select that. Then we want to select what we would like to automate. So we want to automate the filter cutoff. So we do the second drop down and we go to filter cutoff like so. We right click our cursor and we go into the draw mode. Like so, and you can literally draw the automation on like that. It's pretty cool, except we want to go a bit more accurate. So I'm going to zoom right in, and you can see that we can just drag and automate like that. So what that's going to do is that line dictates this knob here, and if you watch this knob here down the bottom, you can see that that line is actually turning that knob for us, and it's opening that filter up. and then I'm going to bring it all the way back down for the start of the next bar. And then again, I'm just going to automate the filter to open up a little bit in the bridge as well, so that it opens up slowly. Now, you can literally automate any parameter of any instrument. That's one of the wonderful things about Ableton, and one of the things it can offer you. So again, just watching that line, it's opening that filter up. I might drop it back down a little bit. Might just... Nice. So I'm not sure if there's any other elements that I would like to automate. Another, maybe I might add a little bit of delay to show you what we can do there. So I'm going to automate the arpeggiated line here. Now, to show you what I did with that arp line, I literally just copy and pasted one of my chord progressions, which was a one-note drone, and I dragged in from the MIDI effects, I dragged in that arpeggiator, set it to up. I made the rate 16 notes, and I made the steps 3, which means it goes up 3 octaves. So, and it sounds by itself something like this. Now I want to automate that delay. So the delay and the panning and volume is in the mixer section of the automation. So we go into mixer, and I want to automate the delay send. So as the line automates up, the delay send will be increased and increased, and you'll hear it like so. Let's choose from, say, there. We're going to increase the delay slowly. Then I'll drop it back down here. So you can see how it quite easily just makes your song and each element kind of flow a little bit and move over time. So automation can be really valuable in that regard. And then just increasing the delay towards the end like so. And then lastly, I might automate the feedback of the delay, which is how long the notes repeat at the end. So if I bring the feedback up, you'll hear that the notes will continue for a long time. Cool little ending. So I've gone over sidechain compression, I've gone over a little bit of panning and some automation, which is some really, really valuable tools to kind of take your mixes to the next step. So if I'm happy with all of this, which I am, I just want to go through one of the last steps, which is really good, is it can get really messy in the arrangement view. So I'm just going to go through and quickly make sure everything is named appropriately and in the right places like so. Awesome, so this is pretty much ready to go. Now there is one last step in any production after mixing, and it's called mastering. Now mastering is a rabbit hole of its own, and I won't go into too much depth with mastering because it's a skill that a lot of engineers focus on. So I find it rare to find mastering engineers that do mixing and production as well. They're usually kind of these really, really intelligent people that kind of just specialize in one thing. But mastering is the process of kind of manipulating the audio right at the end and giving it what it needs. So bringing all the elements together once the song has been bounced. Now, a lot of you in the kind of beginner stage won't really need to worry about mastering, but I'll just show you a really easy and quick way to master your own songs if you kind of want to make them sound as good as they can. Now we want to make sure that our VU meter in the master section isn't hitting too high. Now these are the decibels on the right. Let me just turn my delay on. There we go. Yeah, these are the decibel readings on the side. So we've got -60 up to 0. And we want our decibels to be sitting around about -12, between -12 and -6. And so that means once all the elements of your song in, the loudest part of your song should be no louder than -6 or kind of in between -6 and -12. You can see that by the waveform, the audio file, this green light, should be hitting around 6 dB. Maybe I'll bring it down just a tiny bit to give ourselves what's called headroom. Now, if you were to bounce this right now onto your computer and listen to this song, it would be really, really quiet versus, say, something you've downloaded off the internet that's being mastered. So we're going to quickly go into our master section. And I'm going to kind of do a really quick and easy way of mastering for free. So I'm going to drag a reverb on there. I'm going to drag a compressor. I'm going to go into multiband dynamics and go into multiband compression, which is a standard multiband comp like so. And then lastly, a limiter. I'm going to highlight all of those and do what we did before, and we can group these so that they are one effects chain, which means we can group them and turn the effect on and off as we please. So I'm going to turn them all on and then just mute everything but the reverb. Now what this reverb is going to do, at the moment, if I turn that on and play, it's going to sound pretty horrible. So I'm going to drag the dry and wet signal all the way to 0. Now you can choose a reverb that suits best for your song. I might actually just quickly drag a different reverb, go into room. Bright room's a nice one for mastering, but you can use any. So what this is going to do is this is going to add the same reverb across all the elements of all the songs. So it sounds horrible. I'm going to literally take it back to in between 4 to 6%, which is nothing. Again, if you're listening on laptop speakers or iPod headphones or something, it's going to, like I am, it's going to be quite difficult to hear the nuances of it. If you use studio monitors or better headphones like these, you're more likely to hear the intricacies of what you're doing. So yeah, I just want a little bit of reverb across all the elements of the song. So about 5.6% is fine. We're going to turn on our next step in the mastering chain. We're going to turn on our compressor like that. Now the aim of this is not to saturate it with compression. It's just to kind of like bring all the elements together and make sure there's no parts of the song that jumps too much in volume and whatnot. And I'm going to just scoop it down a tiny bit. Jump over here and you can actually see what the compressor is doing and how much the audio is ducking. That's pretty good. That's maybe a tiny bit drastic. I might just drag it back a tiny bit like so. And you can see it's just ducking the audio ever so slightly. That's probably all you want for the sake of mastering, no more than that. So that's a nice compression setting for that. Now this next step is probably the most important step in the mastering chain. And this is the multiband compression. Basically what that is doing is it's splitting up your audio into 3 bands. You've got your low, your mids, and your highs. And then it's compressing those independently from each other. So you've got to set your frequency to where you want the cutoff of your low frequency to your mid frequency and your mid frequency to your high frequency. So for my high frequency setting, I want to set it to about 4.2 kilohertz. So what that's going to do is that is going to mean that when I compress the high frequencies, it's going to compress all of the audio that is above 4.2 kilohertz in the frequency spectrum. So I can just go 4.2, no, that's 300 hertz. So I want to go 4,300, which is 4.3 kilohertz. And for the low frequencies, again, that's doing the same thing. If I compress the low frequencies, it's going to compress anything below what I set it here, which I'm going to set around 200 hertz, which is going to kind of be all the audio that's going into the subwoofers or the larger speakers in a sound system. Now the goal here is to try and make the audio sound as even and as nice as possible. You've got to be using your ears as opposed to your eyes. So you want it to sound even, you want the highs to kind of be where everything else is, and you want to make all these VU meters kind of sit at the same level. So as I increase the output of the high frequencies, you can see that that VU meter is hitting nearly where the bass is. The bass could probably come down even just a touch. So if I quickly just turn everything off, you can just hear that it brings everything together quite nicely. Those high frequencies in particular are a lot cleaner and crisper. And the last thing in the chain is a limiter, which is just going to give it that brush more volume that we need. Awesome. Now, one thing to note with mastering as well, I'm doing it in the same session that we've been working in, mainly because a lot of you are using the free version of Ableton. But for the purpose of most mastering, it's a good idea to bounce your audio and then drag it into a new session and master it separate from everything else. Each to their own, but that is probably what the majority of professionals would do. Again, I wouldn't probably be going to that effort for the sake of our course. Now, for those of you that do have the ability to bounce your audio, if any, I'll just quickly show you how to do that, and that'll be pretty much our last step in our course, is basically bouncing our song into something that we can put on our phone, upload to the internet, send to our friends, whatnot. Now, we want to hit Command A in the arrangement view to make sure that all the elements of our songs are highlighted, and as we bounce it, everything is there. So I go into File, and I go Export Audio Video, if it's available to you. Now, the render track, we would like to render the master, which is the master channel of audio down the bottom. Also, we don't want to render as a loop or convert to mono because we want as much stereo information as possible. I just want to make sure our dither is turned off. Now, I will just mention with the dither, if you're bouncing your audio to be mastered, you want no dither. But if you've mastered your audio and you're happy with it, then you will add a dither. I won't go into too much detail about the different waveforms that you can use. Basically, dithering is adding an inaudible kind of noise to get rid of any digital distortion and whatnot. So there's some pretty good settings for bouncing. And then we simply export. And we choose whereabouts on our computer we would like to export. I want to save this as Ryan's new tune on my desktop, and like so, it is bouncing. So that's pretty much everything that I have to cover in our crash course in Ableton Live. So hopefully you've been through and you've added your elements, you've kind of played around with them, you've gone into the arrangement view, you've made a structure you're happy with, you've added a few blips and blobs to kind of make the mixing process sound better. And if you're that way inclined, you can even go as far as to try and master your song within the Ableton session. The mastering part, I would say, is optional. It really just depends on where you're going to be listening to music. For the sake of listening to it and for your own enjoyment, this is a good way to do it. But if you are looking to do your music more professionally and you would like to get a professional mastering engineer to do it, that is also very valuable. So hopefully this has helped you and you've enjoyed our course in Ableton Live. I will see you guys all on the Zoom meeting later this week to answer any of your questions. But as for now, thank you so much for joining me and listening to me talk through all of the intricacies of Ableton. There is lots more to learn as you progress. So this is just a really good entry-level kind of course. So if you would like to learn more, please send me an email. If not, it's been wonderful working with you all. Ciao.